if board games teach us anything, one thing I know about Monopoly, you don't buy Monopoly, pull the cover off, and there's a note that says, thank you for purchasing Monopoly. Go to this website to download the money and the tokens and the cards, like everything you need to have to play Monopoly is inside the box. And that's kind of what I want business owners to think about is when we develop these experiences, are you going to make your customers run through hurdles to get started?
Mark, thank you so much for joining me on the Let's Talk Business podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while since we started speaking about scheduling this episode, but finally we're speaking, and this is a topic, I think we're at 160 or 170 episodes. I think we didn't even touch a bit. So this is going to be something new. A lot of business owners use it and could use it, the services of what you offer and the topic that we're going to be discussing. But before we get started, I want to ask you this question because rarely did I see somebody being in the Forbes as the next 1,000 entrepreneurs redefining the American dream. So tell us what earned you that title.
Thank you. You know what? I was surprised by it when it came forward, but I think a lot of what it is how we're leveraging direct mail. I mean, and the way I describe it is that when I was younger, everything was physical. Like if you bought something, you could buy it on the phone, they shipped it to you. And then we had this digital age happen in the early 2000s where things have now gone extreme digital. And people are looking at channels like direct mail as these legacy and old school channels. But the reality is, unlike email open rates, when you get something physical sent to you, chances are the open rates of breaking open a box are so much more than when you open an email in your inbox. And so through that, I think part of what got the attention for this committee was just the fact of how we're reimagining the role that direct mail can play in your business, but more importantly, an enabler to like marry a physical and a digital experience together. So a lot of our philosophy is around it's easier. It's becoming a lot more commoditized in terms of how to quickly launch a product online. How do you up level and stand out? Well, when you tap into more of the senses, have the kinesthetic complementing something virtual, digital. I think that's ultimately what got the attention of Forbes for that accolade was that we're reimagining the role that direct mail can play within that customer experience at home in the post-COVID age.
Okay, so I want to go back a little bit because your agency is called Custom Box Agency. Obviously, we'll talk. This is going to be the premise of the conversation today, and speaking more about what is a custom box and when should you send it as a business owner and dealing with customers and so on and so forth, and what sets this apart from anything else. But I guess there's a backstory. Like, what did you do before that? What did you get till you decided to have this agency, Custom Box Agency?
Oh gosh, this whole business has been an accidental business. It was never meant to be the business, but my backstory is I grew up in a very traditional corporate American upbringing. I thought that was the only way to living a prosperous life is corporate America. And I, went to undergrad, had the dream job. I wanted to work on national marketing campaigns in the beverage realm. And then I went to grad school, got my MBA at Duke, and then worked for a big consulting firm for many, many years. And I thought that would be it. But then I got exposed to the online space and online entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and it opened up this whole new avenue for me. But it took me until it was 2018 that I officially left. I was at Deloitte Consulting for many, many years and went all in on building a business. And where I started was virtual events. This is pre-COVID. For me, I loved this idea that I could build a virtual event and it's a lead gen opportunity. But as I was going through the process of building a virtual event, for me, I kept on saying, like, what would I want to make this a better experience? And for me, what I would want is someone to send me materials to complement the virtual event experience. So that's what we did back in 2018. I launched a virtual event, had about 40 speakers, and we created a publication that went alongside with the virtual event. And what ended up happening is people who got the publication started to do videos. They started to show it off, taking pictures. They started to create all this organic buzz that for me, it just was like, it's you can't do an unboxing or a reveal with a digital product the way you can when you did something physical. And to see how people were interacting with it just kind of made it a no-brainer that anytime I do something digital, it needs a physical component. And the second part that kind of pushed us over the edge was the second virtual event I hosted. I decided I didn't like interviewing 40 people. I wanted it lean to be about 10 to 12 people. And we built an entire box experience to give people all the tools and resources they needed to have a quick win while experiencing this virtual event. And what ended up happening when this happened was We had over a 90% promotion rate from the speakers showing off the box, showing off the pieces in the box because it up leveled them. We had people receive the box, do these 5 to 8 minute videos walking through the contents of the box. So all of a sudden, it was driving all this organic reach that for me was like, there's something here that is a huge opportunity that is so much more than just a swag box that businesses should be looking at. And through that, then it just became a critical part. People kept on asking me, how are we doing this? And eventually it led the pathway to what is today Custom Box Agency. But it was never meant to be the business. It was always the supplement to something else.
Yeah. And that's cool because sometimes, you see the need in the market, you have experienced it yourself, and all of a sudden you say, you know what, if I experienced it, there was probably thousands of others that could experience the same. I want to speak about swag in general. I think I love the line that you have is swag stands for stuff without a goal. And this is what's actually happening. I probably attended about 10 events in the last 7 to 8 weeks, 10 conferences, another one tomorrow and another one next week. And I would say, like, I actually spoke to somebody that sells promotional items and said, you know what, the last event that which was in the healthcare space, and every booth had like a ton of different swag. And I actually looked at it and I said, you know what, people are just doing this blah swag, like just because we have to have something on the table that somebody should stop and maybe say, could I take two for my kids? So what's your opinion about swag in general? And what do you mean by stuff without a goal versus stuff with a goal?
Yeah. So intentionality is everything to me. And part of what you want to do in a good experience is it not only provides people with the tools and resources to have a better experience, but it also should find ways to connect people more to the attractive character, the influencer behind the event, the movement. So how do I indoctrinate you in a really powerful way? So this is where, like, typically when I see swag boxes get really expensive because people put so much swag in it. And a lot of our boxes that we have, like, for me, I would rather you give people the tools they need, but paint the pathway where they can earn different accolades, what we call jewels, that celebrate certain action or certain behavior being taken. So a good example I'll use is, this is from early 2000s. Did you ever remember the whole P90X craze?
No.
So P90X, Beachbody's the company, they came out with this workout video that literally in 90 days, using just your body and watching the videos each day, you can get in the best shape of your life. And what was really cool about what they did was when they sent you the box, inside the box was a welcome note, a guide for how to get started, a journey map, something that you can put on the wall to mark off the 90 days of working out, and then all the tools and resources you need, which at the time in the 2000s was just the DVDs. They didn't send you swag unless you took the call to action at the end, which is they asked you to take a before picture on day 1 and an after picture on day 90. And they basically said, we want to celebrate you. So they created a feedback loop that said, they wanted to send you a t-shirt, a Team Beachbody t-shirt to celebrate the transformation. So essentially, they engineered a way to collect a testimonial in exchange for a relic or a jewel that celebrated the achievement. So in that sense, the t-shirt doesn't represent you showed up to an event and I've given you a t-shirt. The t-shirt represents celebrating you for this transformation that you went through. And what happens with a lot of people with swag is, like, I've gone to conferences and live events that, like, I just show up and they give me 3 t-shirts. If I don't feel connected to the movement, I don't feel connected to you, it's stuff. What does stuff do? It either stays in your room in the hotel or it goes to Goodwill. Like, you donate it. So for me, like, I want the intentionality. So in terms of the pieces, is it going to connect me more to the influencer? Is it going to provide me the tools I need to have a certain experience? It's one thing to give someone a water bottle. It's a different thing to give them your water bottle. And then to say, and I'll use an example as an entrepreneur, like, if you had a ritual that was, when I get stressed out, I take my water bottle, fill it with water, and go outside and drink it for 15 minutes and just breathe in fresh air. Well, then it's very different when you send your community your water bottle so they can, like, replicate or emulate you when they're going through something similar. So that's kind of where it becomes more with intentionality in terms of the item that you're using, as opposed to, we went to foreign print or discount mugs and saw these cute items and we're going to get it branded and give it out. Like, I want it to be intentional, but this is why we don't typically lead with swag. We lead with the tools that they need to have the transformation, but we may supplement swag at critical points.
So basically, what you're sharing is that basically everything in business you have to be intentional about. Nothing happens by accident. So you're saying that a week before the show and you say, oh, we're going to the show, and we're calling the promo guy and saying, you know what, can you still get me in time for the show? And then they say, oh, pens, I could get you some pens and stress balls. And then all of a sudden it's pens and stress balls.
Yeah.
But based on what you're saying, that if what you're doing as a business is taking off people's stress, then a stress ball would be an intentional product.
Yeah. I mean, and it's all like, and especially if you can connect it back to a story you tell on stage or something that you're doing, those pieces mean a lot more when people know they're in the know, as opposed to here's a bunch of cool stuff that's branded. I don't think people need more stuff. I think people want outcome as to why they bought the product or service in the first place.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've seen as a consumer myself is there is something like you mentioned till now, which is the physical, getting a physical box in the mail. There's also the surprise element, the unexpected element of it. So I want you to speak about, in a client's journey, when you speak to companies that want to wow the experience, it's all about going from a transaction to an experience to today's day and age, and have this wow factor, the unexpected factor. What does the client journey look like when you have to map it out for a company?
Yeah. So for us, there's a couple of things that we like to look at. With anyone, you want to have a clearly defined finish line. So what is the desired outcome as to why I'm buying your product or service in the first place? On the other end of the spectrum, you want to have a very well-defined onboarding process. And with any journey map, it needs to take me from onboarding, getting used to your products or services, to the desired outcome. You need to show me the pathway. So when we work with clients, what happens is they kind of know the starting place and they kind of know the ending place, but they don't have a clear map of how they take people from A to Z. And part of it is when you have that process defined, not only is it really empowering for people who are going through your products and services, it's also used as sales collateral, because you can showcase when you're selling, we have a clearly defined pathway. And that's what we need in terms of a box experience. One thing I'll tell you is if you see our boxes, it's very common for our boxes to be more on the smaller side. The reason we like a smaller size box is it all goes back to things that we know that you save. So I know when you read a book, you don't throw out a book. You typically put it on a bookshelf. So that's why we love boxes that are a little bit bigger than books. This is why we're going to brand the spine, provide some indication of exactly what's in this. But with any experience, I may show you a journey map that's what to expect over the next 12 months, but the box experience may have what you need for the first 3 months. And part of that is it creates this open loop that if you want to complete the journey, you have to keep participating. Otherwise, we're not going to send it to you until you hit that milestone, or if it's a timing factor, until that time is ready to send you to the next piece. So that's kind of where it's very much focused on, have we clearly defined the journey? And then especially for that first quick win, have we given them all the tools and resources? And typically what I don't advise is, especially if people are on a month-to-month payment plan with your products and services, don't give them a year's worth of stuff because it's overwhelming. Give them exactly what they need for that first big hurdle, because you can always introduce the next box of the series. You can say this is box 1 of 4. And you can kind of see behind me, Insider, this is a program that had 3 different boxes that were released at different points to spell the word Insider when you collected all the boxes and you had it on your bookshelf. So there's all different ways to do it. But at the end of the day, what I'm really focused on is, have you defined a clear journey and have you given them what they need for that first big hurdle or that first big milestone?
So a lot what we're speaking about is let's say companies that would offer that, as you mentioned before about the program, a weight loss program or something like that. So there is a client journey there from the before, during, and after, so to speak. What we say, let's say a typical person listening to the show, maybe they're a service provider, maybe they sell payroll services, okay, but they still want to have that unboxing experience and giving something physical to the client. Maybe they're a software provider and they have a recurring revenue model with people signing up to the software. What would be some of those typical examples where they could use the boxing concept?
Yeah, and especially if you look at someone that's like a software as a service, even if it's for employee retention, the first 30 days is so critical that part of what I would want to see is, are you providing a 30-day experience that indoctrinates people to start to utilize your products and services? So if there's certain ways that you do planning to feed whatever the software as a service platform may serve, whatever the value prop is of that platform, if you can get people utilizing the software, you're going to see attrition rates start to minimize. So then the question is, when I send you a box experience, can I paint a map pathway that's the first 30 days or the first 14 days to getting them to use it? If I can get you to use the software as a service platform and you can start to see that you're comfortable with it, at the end of the day, what I want to do at the beginning of any process is reduce overwhelm. How can I reduce overwhelm? Well, if I give you what you need to be able to go through and have the experience, if I can gamify it in a really powerful way, then I can transform that onboarding experience in order to keep you on board. So that's a lot of what I'll look at for software as a service. We're building out a couple boxes right now for software as a service companies. And that's the biggest thing, is that how do I get you indoctrinated and like knowing how to navigate and utilize this program? Because if I can get you to do that up front and you don't feel overwhelmed, and like a lot of people, someday I'm going to do it, then it's going to help really reduce attrition, reduce a lot of the tech support questions or customer support questions, and get people through that first major hurdle.
Mhm. If you don't mind, like diving deeper, let's say this is a software as a service, right? Let's say it's a CRM software. How would you decide, your team and the client decide what belongs in a box like that? Like, what would be like the typical elements that make up a box?
Yeah, so we have our base elements that are pretty critical to any box experience. And what those are inside a box, I want to see a welcome note, which is kind of the what and the why. It reinforces kind of that buyer decision. The second piece that we like to see is what we call a guide. If it's an event, it's an event guide. If it's a program, it's a program guide. It could be a software guide, but it's basically something that's designed to reiterate the tools and resources that they have access to, reinforces the journey that they're about to go on. I also like to see the value ladder or the universe of what this individual can offer above and beyond that product or service, because sometimes people don't do a good job introducing all the other ways that they could help you. And I like to reinforce it with customer testimonials. So welcome note, guide. The other pieces I like to see are a journey map. So it's typically a dedicated piece that is highly visual, that shows that this is the journey you're going to be going on for this part of the adventure. And then the final piece is any tools and resources that they need to have it. So a big philosophy that I have is, if board games teach us anything, one thing I know about Monopoly, you don't buy Monopoly, pull the cover off, and there's a note that says, thank you for purchasing Monopoly. Go to this website to download the money and the tokens and the cards. Like, everything you need to have to play Monopoly is inside the box. And that's kind of what I want business owners to think about, is when we develop these experiences, are you going to make your customers run through hurdles to get started? Meaning, like, their intent is good when they buy it, but they have to do all these things in order to get started. Or are you just going to give them what they need? And for me, it just takes all the excuses off the table. You remove obstacles, because if I send you what you need, it's inside the box. And then in terms of the materials, the more we break down the step-by-step of what you're asking people, this is what we tell clients. We can design anything. Like, I just need to know what it is you're trying to do, and I'll tell you how to lay it out. That's not a problem. That's kind of where we have a lot of fun. But like, this is kind of where, if I meet with the client and he tells me or she tells me, when I go through this planning process or introduce whatever platform it may be, here's how I do it. I build a framework that does this. I take Post-it notes and do this. We're going to rebuild that entire system so they can do that at home when your customers receive that box experience, essentially.
So it's obviously a lot of what we discuss is in the boxes is a lot educational components towards the outcome and the goal that you have with communicating with the company, so to speak, or the product and services you just bought. Where do you see the boxing experience or even swag experience when it's just for the purpose of gifting, so to speak, for the relationship of the client?
Yeah, we break down our campaigns into 3 categories, and they're all what we consider the customer lifecycle. So your customer lifecycle has 3 core phases. Phase 1 is what we call acquisition. This is all the activities of people discovering you up to the point of sale of that initial product or service. So all that nurturing activity, there's one type of campaign that's focused on driving you to acquire the customer, client, partner. The second category is delivery. Delivery is typically where you see you bought my product or service, you hired my agency, you bought my course or my coaching program, you attended my virtual event. Part of delivering that experience is I send you a box that really is focused on a clear pathway from onboarding to the desired outcome of the product or service you have. The third category is what we call retention. Retention is all about like seeding the next way you can serve it. So it's really focused on extending lifetime value. Recognition is a big part of retention. So awards, any type of accolades to celebrate you when you hit a certain milestone, giving your people something to strive for. That is a retention play. So in terms of when we talk about like gifting can easily be something that fits in, especially if it's an active customer. To me, it's a retention play. It's a, how do you reinforce the relationship and reinforce the behavior? How do you reactivate a client if you needed to? There's a lot of different, how do you recognize a client at special milestones in their life, anniversary, wedding days, birth of a baby. There's all different ways that you could leverage gifting. But to me, I consider a lot of those, especially if it's an active customer, to be retention plays in terms of how you're enhancing that relationship with that client.
One of the places where companies are struggling a lot and they're trying to do programs like this is with employee retention. In particular, since the pandemic, where there's a lot of remote employees and they feel like isolated and not being part of the office experience, is I've seen a lot of conversation around sending stuff, swag and boxes and so on and so forth. How would that differ from what you just laid out as far as on the customer journey?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's such a timely question, because there's a book that just got released that is Never Lose an Employee Again by Joey Coleman. I don't know if you've heard of this book. He wrote a book called Never Lose a Customer Again. Love that book. But we actually wrote a case study on how we would leverage boxes for employee retention. So a big thing is you need to look at with any employee, what are the critical milestones? This is a conversation that we had to see, like, employee retention doesn't start on day one of the employee. It typically starts during the recruitment process or when you extend an offer. And so one of the ways that we're looking at, and some of the concepts we're playing with on boxes and employee retention, is how do you gamify the first 6 to 12 months of that employee onboarding experience, and how do you incentivize behavior in the right way? One of the ways that I would leverage boxes, if you were asking me from an employee retention standpoint, would be when you get an offer, you trigger a box that kind of welcomes them and kind of sets level set of the values and the mission of the company. But one of the things that we're starting to test a little bit more is in terms of things that people say. When we think of a box experience, I don't want to just develop a box experience. I want it to be something that you save, something that you keep, something that you reference back and forth. One of the tenets of things that we save are things that you collect. And I know if you're collecting something, then you are less likely to throw it out because you're trying to collect all the pieces to the set or the series. And so one of the elements of what we're trying to test right now is, could I send you at the beginning of your employee experience something like a coin board? A coin board is, if you remember, I think this was 2000s when the United States released a different quarter for every state.
Yeah.
You could buy these boards that you can put the coins in as you collected the different coins. We're leveraging that same thing to say, could we gamify the first 6 to 12 months of an employee experience where they can earn different medals or coins to complete their coin board and truly get on board of that first year, and gamify it in a way that just unlocks new opportunities based on the actions that they take. So for me, gamification and finding a way to install something that they can collect through that process. We as human beings have this desire to complete things and close that loop. And so that is, like, for us, that is one of the avenues that we're looking and exploring to say, how can we make a case for this with it? But the approach would be no different. You still want to define a clear journey for them to follow and incentivize behavior at critical milestones.
And would you see a different process for in remote companies versus in office type of environments?
I think it all could be the same. I don't know what the difference with remote is. You can collect it at your desk versus collecting it at home. I think in post-COVID era, I think it's really just important to see. I just assume by default now that it's a lot more accepted and a lot more mainstream to assume that a company may have some degree of a hybrid model, if not exclusively virtual as well. But I think either way, the approach should be similar.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think it goes back to where we started, which is the intentionality. Like, if you're speaking about an employee retention, it doesn't happen by accident. Yes, you need to have a great culture, but you need to foster that, and when we speak about company culture, I always use the line that when I ask a person, like, name a company with a great culture, they'll say Google, and because they have ping pong tables and babysitting service. And they don't need that culture of excellence is way more than just a ping pong table. And they confuse a great culture with perks. But what you just mentioned about gamifying the process and feeling the person, okay, I'm a year now after all these collections, I'm a year with the company, and like I'm a really part of the team, and getting them in really, really part of the culture. And that way, I think it's being intentional about it. I think it's so important. I want to ask you just in general, because I know that we focus a lot on boxing, on the boxing experience and the journey of a client or an employee. But there is also a place where companies go to events, companies go to shows, they just want to have different swag. We touched upon it before. I want to just dive in a little deeper as well, if for a couple of minutes.
Sure.
Like, how would you go, like, if a company is making their budget for swag or figuring out what type of swag they want to give out, like if a company comes to you and they're seeking out advice, how would you approach that?
For any swag, the elements of swag that I typically like would be a connection piece back to the business or the influencer. And so this is like, it's one thing to get just an item that's stuff. It's another thing to bring it to life with a story component. The other thing that I really like to think about with swag is like, again, everything that I think about goes back to this idea of what do people save and why do you save it? So there are certain tenets of things that we save, like the natural, like I know when you read a book, things that you reference, like you'll put it on a bookshelf, you won't throw it out. Things with replayability. I know that when it comes to movies, CDs, DVDs, cassettes, vinyl records, my father still has his 8-track and vinyl records at home, even though he has no means to play these. Things that replayability. The same as with sporting equipment. So if you can replay it, the same as with board games. Things with replayability, you tend to save. I know things that recognize you, you tend to save. I know that things that you collect, you tend to save. So just knowing kind of that, when I think about the types of swag that I would want if I was going to a trade show, how can I bridge how can it be something with intentionality, but how can it also bridge the connection with physical to digital? An easy way to do this is through QR codes. It's one thing to have a water bottle. It's another thing to have a water bottle with QR code on it. We built out our own QR code platform for this very reason, but I can take a QR code and pre-schedule where the QR code goes. So one thing about QR codes is pre-COVID, a lot of us never really, like it wasn't as mainstream until COVID and post-COVID when the restaurant industry really made it, widely accepted. But the cool thing about QR codes is they could be passive or they could be static or they could be dynamic. Static means once you build it, you can't change it. Dynamic QR codes mean at any point in time, I can redirect where that QR code goes. So as long as you understand that concept with any piece of swag, I can put a QR code on it. And if you scan it today, and then you scan it again a few days later, it may provide a different experience. So let's just say if we used a water bottle as an example, I can set a QR code that if you're in the fitness space, if you scan the water bottle Monday, it gives you the Monday workout. But if you scan it Tuesday, it gives you the Tuesday workout. I can do the same thing with magnets. I can put a QR code on a magnet or a sticker that when you scan it, I could say, hey, if you're in the meal prep place zone, if you scan it Monday or 1 month, it has one set of meals. But if you scan it the next month, it's constantly evolving. Things that are evolving, again, just gets back to this idea, are you more or less likely to save it if it's always providing a new experience, especially with how you tie physical to digital? So the challenge I would have for people if you're doing trade shows is, how can you turn this into something that people are more likely to save? Can you leverage QR codes and how they're ever evolving, especially if you have a big digital footprint or want to drive them to some value and ultimately a higher ticket point of sale? How can you leverage that and extend the relationship well beyond just the product itself? So that's kind of how I start to look at it. In terms of a budget, the good news is adding a QR code to something and not isn't really going to change the cost of it. I think it can have the opportunity to increase the perceived value of it if executed in the right capacity. But that's the big thing. This is kind of why I'm like, stop with swag, like a lot more intentionality and let it be a relic or a jewel that pulls people back to getting more connected to your movement.
I think what you just mentioned about the QR code is brilliant, because sometimes you give a person a swag, and maybe it is a swag that stays on a person's desk, but there's zero engagement with the brand from there on. They took it and that's about it. If you could add the engagement element with the QR code, this is brilliant, really brilliant.
And the cool thing we've seen, though, I've had clients that have had lifeline cards. If you're in the coaching space, if you ever get stressed out, scan the QR code and there could be a different motivational video. And then they're going to hit you with another point of sale if you're ready to advance up in their products and services. I've had people do it on a vinyl sticker that if you have a laptop, on the left and right of the mouse, it's a blank space. And they say, put this there. Anytime you need a playlist to pick you up, scan this. Just think about the experience that your people are going through and how can you leverage that? So yeah, there's so many different ways to play with that.
This is very cool. I thought you mentioned about the restaurant industry making the QR code famous. I thought you were going to say it was the Coinbase ad in Super Bowl that had the QR code that made it famous.
Which, as simple as it is, there's brilliance in simplicity. Like, do you think I wasn't there for Super Bowl doing scanning it?
Yeah, that was a brilliant campaign. Any final thoughts as far as swag or boxes, or how business people walking away from this episode should think about it? Anything that we didn't cover yet?
Biggest thing that I would just say is, how can you create ritual, routine, the repeatability of an experience? So this is kind of what I think a lot of people don't understand is when you start to blend physical and digital, you unlock a whole new realm that you can't do with a digital only or a physical only product. And I think that interaction between the two, there's just so much magic that can happen. if you engineer the right experience. So a box experience, if you don't have an offer that converts and if you don't know who your avatar is, it's not going to save you. But if you really have your offer dialed in and you have real good clarity on who you serve, it's a really powerful amplifier to your business.
Yeah, for sure. We see it actually with the conversations in retail space. You know, the retail space, if they are not combining digital and physical, some of those will go out of business, while others like Best Buy that are trying to mimic the two and bring them together, I think they're winning because it's just a matter of there is a place in the world that people want to have a physical human next to them or a physical product next to them, and nothing digital will replace that.
I just bought something on Amazon that was actually, I mean, Best Buy put all their products on Amazon too. And it was buy then, and it let me go pick it up in store, which I thought was really interesting to see that even Best Buy is embedding their products in platforms like Amazon.
Beautiful. For the links, resources mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes at www.ptechgroup.com/podcast, where we'll link up to what's the best website or where could people find you.
Customboxagency.com.
That's simple, customboxagency.com. And the reason why it's custom, because it has to be custom, because it's for your goals and it has to be intentional of what you're trying to achieve. Let's close with the 4 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Number 1, a book that changed your life.
Book that changed my life. This is probably a common one for most people, but 4-Hour Workweek absolutely changed my life.
Are you working more than 4 hours?
Oh, I don't think there will ever be a universe that I don't work more than 4 hours. For me, I feel like I'm so wired to work, but I'll say this real quick. This is semi-rapid fire. One of the lessons that it taught me was the idea of like your strengths are your strengths and weaknesses are your weaknesses, and to enhance and develop your strengths. And that's just true for anyone, is that like I thought I needed to bring my weaknesses up to my strengths. And the reality is your competitive edge is your strengths, and you should continue to grow and develop those. So that was a concept that was pretty transformative to me from that book.
Yeah, it's so true. I actually wrote a LinkedIn post a while ago about it, that in our school system in education, we're always finding those weak points and trying to say, you got to work on it. You got to work on it. You got to work on it. Sometimes it's not worth it. Work on your strengths and keep on using your strengths to your advantage.
100%.
Number 2, a piece of advice you got that you'll never forget.
This is what transformed my business. It's okay to represent many different functions, but be known for one thing. And, I hold a belief that like, I want other people to win. And therefore I assume that other people want me to win. And when you have a business that is so complex that other people can't easily help you win, you just made it that much more complicated. So for me, I had a mentor looking at me saying, I had this business in virtual events and this business in custom boxes. And he's like, you are confusing people, pick one. So I went all in boxes, and the simple thing of doing that made it so easy for other people to communicate our value prop and help promote us. And our business took off just by going all in on being known for one big thing.
Beautiful. Number 3, anything you wish you could go back and do differently?
Gosh, this is that question. I'd like to say no. I think everything has a silver lining. Everything reveals a part of the equation, good or bad. So I'm pretty happy with the journey people ask me all the time, would you go back to business school? And the answer is yes. It was good, but now I feel like the world has changed in a big way, but I don't regret the decision to do it because it led me to the path I'm on now.
Beautiful. Last and final question. What's still on your bucket list to achieve?
Places that I want to visit, I really want to go to Easter Island. That's on my bucket list, to go see the big heads on Easter Island. There's a couple little places like that. I'd like to go back to Iceland and do the full ring road. That's on my bucket list too. So a lot of it's adventure and travel and outdoors, things that I would like. I love to get out in nature and remind like myself that like Mother Nature's still in control. If you've ever gone to Grand Canyon, you can feel that pretty heavily, but it just reminds you that we've created this digital chaos online, and sometimes to escape to nature is a really powerful thing.
Yeah, so true. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. I know your time is valuable, and that is why in the name of our listeners, we'll forever be grateful for sharing some of your time with us today. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
My pleasure.